So I have two ideas that I'll throw out practically. And I'd encourage you just to think more about this, and I'll give you, just in case you might be writing something down. This is under heading number 1. I have two concepts I'm trying to share with you. This is the first, gratefulness. Under that, two practical ideas of what could we do that could reintroduce gratefulness into a culture that we know has lost it. And if you don't really believe me that culture has lost its gratefulness, go hang out with some teenagers. And you will see that largely people don't appreciate value, and they don't say thank you for the things that they're given. The first thing, on a very personal, practical level, I'm wondering, as I just kind of script this out, if we shouldn't say that the concept of Thanksgiving needs to happen a little bit more often. Thank you Thursdays, where in our context we look for ways to demonstrate gratefulness every Thursday, just as a practical idea, to start reintroducing that into a culture that has lost it. And here's what's interesting: when you start to say thank you to people who add value to your life, you realize you end up saying thank you to people who own businesses, and people who are investors, and to people who work in politics, and people in your own household, people in your own family, anyone who adds value to your life. You say, you know what, my responsibility to them is to appreciate that value. And as we start to do that, my prayer would be that that kind of a simple cultural shift at the ground level would start to trickle up a little bit. And we would start to see a different appreciation for what value is. Some of you who are into the whole conversation about fiat money and the Federal Reserve, I would think you would be very interested in this as well. Because what does all that really represent? What is value? People have lost the concept of what it even means to hold something that's valuable. Well, where do we begin in restoring that? As much as you could say, end the Fed, or other wonderful ideas for the future, right? In this moment, at this time, we have to start culturally, not just with another bill in Congress. And that's where I think we have to recover the concept of value. The second practical idea, and this is purely from what's probably a very uninformed mind, which is mine, something legislatively that we could consider doing that I think would change the game when it comes to the entitlement mentality is something that you'll like as soon as I share it with you, because it adds that value to what's being done through government. But it's something that the other side will like as well, because it does add just a little bit more complication to government. And I figure, well, as long as we're offering them that, they should be on board. Here's the idea. A source of funding requirement for any direct aid payment offered by a local, state, or federal government agency. So if the government gives you money for any reason as a direct aid payment, on the receipt for that has to appear representatively a source of funding. So you're not holding your Obama phone, you're holding a phone that's provided by, and then representatively, and a computer can just spit these things out and just write down the line of the Federal Register, the Beckett Corporation in Avon Lake. And you're looking at that, and what do you think when you see that? Something a little different. Or what if it spits out a first name and a last initial and a city of the taxpayer who made that food stamp check or payment possible, or that subsidy possible? And it says, Dan and Melissa J., Seville, Ohio. What happens to you when you know that a person gave you a gift instead of a big corporate entity like a government? What fills your heart? Gratitude. Now, some people are crass and evil anyway, and they're not going to respond to that. But you know what? I don't think that's the average American. I think a lot of the people who are on assistance, and thus a lot of the people who feel like they have to depend on government, and maybe they even feel like they have to support candidates that are promising even more government, part of the issue is they're not seeing the source of funding. And that's why someone could stand up and say, I'm waiting for my Obama money, or I'm holding my Obama phone. It's not really an Obama phone. It could be a Mark Iacona phone, for all we know, because it could have been your tax dollars paying for that lady's phone she's holding, right? So let's tell her where it came from. So I just encourage you to ruminate on that a little bit. I'm not a legislator. I don't know how laws come from, from inception to reality. But I think on a local or state level, it would be far less complicated. And we obviously have a state government that's a little bit friendly to our way of thinking. And maybe, just maybe, tying a source of funding to aid payments could give people just a sense of gratefulness. And then I think in that broader context, we have this whole mess going on with class warfare. Do you realize what a simple change would do? But what that simple change could do to that whole mentality? You're looking down at this little few dollars the government sent you, and you're recognizing that it was Marty S. from Medina, Ohio that sent it to you. Are you bitter and angry at Marty for being a little richer than you? Or are you grateful? And all of a sudden you're looking, and I'm thinking, here's the beauty of it. The Mitt Romney Family Trust would probably be on a whole bunch of scripts, right? All these rich people that are demonized, all these big corporations that are demonized, people start to realize this is actually the source of the help I'm getting. So we're not asking to change, we need to legislate different ways that we help people, of course, that's all unsustainable. But this doesn't require different dollars, it just attaches some value to those dollars. A different kind of value, unity in the country instead of division. So that's one concept that I'd ask you to think about. The other is a little bit more personal, and it's the concept of fatherhood. As I've tried to boil down what is really the cultural deficiency, I think the character flaw is gratefulness, a lack of gratefulness. And I think that the flaw that maybe we could take the most practical action on tomorrow is the issue that in America, so many children grow up and they form their opinions about life and their whole sense of being based on their father. Now, mothers are critically important. But I don't hear people very often saying, I think we have a motherhood crisis in America. Have you ever heard someone say that? To their credit, mothers they're pulling the weight. They're pulling more than their fair share of the burden and of really the joy of raising children and growing the next generation. But it's fathers and the lack thereof, if you were to go to the inner city today, that defines the whole culture and community. Why is it that 50 million people have to be on food stamps? Now, some people legitimately need that help, and we should find ways to help them, be it through public or private means that seem appropriate. But what's the real issue? I would say a lot of those recipients are from a broken home. A lot of those recipients are single moms or children that grew up that didn't have a provider dad, and as a result, their sense of how things are provided is really that you go and stand in line at the Social Security office and you wait your turn, or you get on disability, or you work the system. So here again, we have a cultural problem that is multiplied. I saw a statistic from the year 2000 that said that something like 20 million American babies were being born in the year 2000 without a father in the picture. Well, those are 20 million people who today are 12, and in 2016 they'll be late teenagers, and two election cycles from now they'll be voting. They'll be voting having never known what a father provider really is. And as a result, they've probably lived most of their life on some sort of an assistance, and that's what they expect, that's what they think is normal. They're not looking for a way to get out of that system and say, hey, I'm here, I'm down on my luck, I'm so glad there was a safety net, now I'm going to pull myself up and just go start my own business. No, they're not in that zone because no one's ever taught them to be there. You might, and I might, feel really guilty. Not guilty in an evil sense, but if someone started having to support you and you knew you could work, you knew you could make that money, wouldn't it just kind of eat at you, and you would be very grateful But you would also start to think, I can't take advantage of this generosity. I really want to get self-sufficient. Well, where did that value come from in your heart? Well, I would suggest that it came from your upbringing, from the kind of family you grew up in, from the values that were passed down to you. If that's not there, then it's not there. And then we look around and we look at a city and we say, how did this city change so much? Well, there's been 30 or 40 or 50 years of family breakups multiplying, and now here we are. So how do we walk that back? We can't go to those people and talk to them about political philosophy, say, oh, you should be an entrepreneur. They don't even know what that means. And they've never seen anyone in their cultural context do that successfully. But what they do know is that there's help from the government. So how do we change that? I think on a very personal level, it falls to you and I to look around and to start considering what it would mean to try to reintroduce fatherhood and family unity back into a culture that doesn't have very much left. Now here's what I'm just personally struggling with. I look around at the families that I know and the people I'm involved with, and I think even just really good citizens or really strong members of our church, well, their families aren't doing so well. So imagine if you took the faith out of that or took the values out of that, and then it's even potentially worse. So we really have a great mountain to climb when it comes to that, but I think that the answer begins in the hearts of men, fathers who will stand up and say, you know what, I'm not just going to look at the sons that biologically I have, but let's look at some other young men, young women who need that figure in their life, so that government no longer has to be their daddy, as the bumper sticker says. There's many ways that we can approach that, but when I think about what could the conservative movement, the Tea Party movement, what could we be doing for the next 4 years? What could we be doing until the next big flurry of election activity comes? And of course there are practical ideas that we need to address, like we talked about earlier. But if you want to be a part of the cultural answer, and not just for elections, but actually to help people live the life that they're supposed to live, I think these two places are a place to start. Gratefulness and fatherhood. So let's talk more about that. Let's talk about how that looks practically, personally. But I'd ask you as just an individual to consider, even to pray, how you could be involved. Thank you for your time, and be happy to interact with questions if you like.
No questions?
Okay, I can start. You know, the idea of putting names on checks and all that that's a really good idea. But you know, so many of us feel so hopeless that there's so many people acting against that sort of thing. The progressives don't want anything attached to any handout. They want those people to just take all this stuff, and then there's no perceived value when you're given stuff constantly. There's no value on any of that stuff, and it's all being wasted. I belong to a group called Free Cycle, and that's a place where you're supposed to donate things you no longer need that are still of value, so they don't end up in a landfill. And I've been on this group. It's a national group. Every county's got their own version, and it's a really great group for a lot of people, but I see so many people ask for things constantly, and they're not asking for things headed for the landfill. Every year, the same people ask for Christmas ornaments, Christmas trees, Christmas lights, and what I've determined is at the end of Christmas, they throw all that stuff away. So no, there's no value in anything given anymore. Welfare, I have customers in my store who go to the local food bank, and then since I have a resale shop, they bring me the stuff they don't want. They don't take hardly anything. I don't like that brand of peanut butter. I don't like that brand of jelly. I mean, we're so hopeless. Welfare reform from Clinton did a lot. where people had to actually work a little bit, but they threw that out, didn't they? Obama threw that out. So you can't ask anyone who's getting anything to go and do something for it. It's, you know, demeaning to pick up trash by the side of the road or to
Right.
volunteer somewhere. I don't know.
Well, let me give you two reasons not to say it's hopeless, even though we're all tempted to say that, right? Here's two things I have hope in. One is the progressive agenda that in many ways created a lot of this, and really that's almost more of a symptom. Sure, they had their strategy to make these things happen, but the symptom is really that the hearts of average people have changed, and the values haven't passed down generation to generation the way that we need them to. But here's two reasons to have hope. That progressive agenda was phased in over, you know, you can pick the number of decades you think that this took, but probably all the way back from the 30s when people started really to look to government as their answer. It will take us a while to recover value. And it may take some hard times. It may take people realizing that the system we have today is not built on real value, and when that has to reset, all of a sudden, some of that may be recovered. That's what we would hope the outcome would be. The other reason, so one reason to hope is that if we start personally, that does make an impact in our sphere of influence, and as those people then make an impact in their sphere of influence, it does ultimately change the country and the world. So we have to have faith that our small part of making a difference does eventually work itself out in the big picture, and I really believe that's true. The second reason that I have hope, and this comes from my experience as a minister, is that I know that things that are very hopeless, when spiritual awakening happens in a person's life, things can change a lot faster than you might think. And my own family is a testament to that. And so I believe that there's not only an answer for us, maybe practically speaking, in that incremental, let's change you, let's change me, our family, the next family, but there's also hope that God is still alive. And that change can still happen faster than you might think in a family or even in a whole community.
Hey there, my name's Rich Swiger, and I want to add something to the conversation. I grew up in an incredibly left home, incredibly democratic-minded home, and we were on welfare from the time that I was a child. I didn't wean off the government until much later in my life. But what's coming to my mind, especially with the idea that you are bringing with adding value to something, an aid program and putting a name on it, I remember as a kid, we would stand in line for our welfare cheese. We would stand in line for our government butter. We would stand in line for the peanut butter and the free handouts. And the values that I was taught as a child were get all you can for free and plenty of it. If you steal something, it's not illegal unless you get caught. So those awful values that I was taught as a child, they made me a very, very selfish person. And when we would stand in line for the welfare cheese, Dan, I never was thankful. I was never grateful. I thought that they owed me the cheese. And we always tried to hustle. My mom had 5 children, and so all 5 of us would get in line, and each of us would get a block of cheese, and we considered ourselves a big pat on the back. We got over, and we weren't thankful to anybody regarding getting those freebies. We gave ourselves the credit. I mean, think about that. I got the cheese, and it wasn't something that the farmer made. That was something that I created for my family. I got in the line. I was smart enough to figure out how to get over on the system. And I'm sure that that's the way that people think across the board, and when they're having to depend on getting something for free, they probably give themselves the credit for going down to the welfare office and being smart enough to sign up for an Obama phone. And by the way, Obama's getting all the credit for all those phones because his name's all over them. So they're not looking at the fact that Mr. Iacona might have had his tax dollars going into that phone. They're thinking Obama's a hero. Now, if I had known all the way back then that some farmer was churning the milk to make the cheese, and Farmer Jones down the street had all that effort into making that cheese to go into a box to be given to me, that might have made a little bit of a difference in the way that I was looking at things all the way back then. And I think that's a fantastic idea. I just want to say that.
Thanks for your
Don't
story there.
stop.
Let's-
What made you change?
What changed you?
I got on my face before Christ. I really don't know exactly what changed me. Maybe it was a combination of things. I went through the prison system. I made a lot of errors growing up, and I made a lot of bad decisions that got me in a lot of trouble. But when I really got to the bottom of it, and I got before my face before Christ, and I said, you know, I'm miserable. My life is horrible. Something clicked and changed. And then one day I turned on the radio and I listened to Glenn Beck.
That was the other part of the transformation. We've all been
And he
there.
started talking about, but it just got to a point where I just felt like, you know what, there's an element missing in me. And another thing that changed the entire way that I look at things is education. I went through college, I started getting educated, and even though the education system, when you really start understanding the principles of standing on your own 2 feet and hard work and effort and having those conservative values, you start seeing the truth in education. They're not built on that at all. Most college professors today, as far as I'm concerned, are extreme leftists, and they're teaching socialism and Marxism and all that. But my eyes started opening up to these things, and I started realizing that in order for me to have a life and in order for me to be able to contribute back to society, I need to start giving rather than taking. And that is where gratitude really comes in. So,
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Rich. Appreciate
I
that. All right, we'll let the lady go first, and then you can be next.
I have kind of either